Can the Denver Broncos offense stay hot against a very talented Houston Texans defense? How will Vance Joseph's secondary hold up without the reigning Defensive Player of the Year, Patrick Surtain? And can CJ Stroud find a way to avoid a long, long day against Denver's vaunted pass rush? All things to come on today's rundown. Thank you so much for joining us. While you're here, make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube page at DenverSports 1043. You can find us at that handle on our YouTube channel, Instagram, and TikTok. If you're watching us live on X or Facebook Live, like, share, subscribe, smash that follow button, and come along with us for the ride. We are doing a Broncos-Texans preview on this Halloween Friday, Football Friday, and to help us break down all things Texans, we welcome in former Texans defensive lineman and morning show co-host on Sports Radio 610 in Houston, one half of Payne and Pendergast, Seth Payne. Seth, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure, man. I'm excited about this one. This is a measuring stick game for the Texans because they failed in their last measuring stick game versus the Seahawks. So this is big for Texans fans.
Yeah, I think so too. I think many here in Broncos country are looking at it as a little bit of a measuring stick game for them as well. Because let's be honest, their last 5 quarters of football offensively here in Denver have been unbelievable. You got 77 total points scored between the fourth quarter against the Giants and the game against the Dallas Cowboys. But that's against the worst defense in the NFL. And the first 3 quarters and change of the Giants game, they looked like one of the more inept offenses in the NFL. Defensively, Denver has kind of hung their hat more consistently than what Sean Payton's system's been able to do. But I do think there is still this feeling in Denver, nationally and even here locally, about whether or not the Broncos look like they're for real in 2025, and they're building off of the surprise season they had last year with the wild card berth. How are the Broncos viewed over there in the Lone Star State from that many miles away?
I think, like, if we were going to do that thing where I'm comparing my car to the neighbor's car, the feature that you guys have that I would be jealous of is your rushing attack. Because like J.K. Dobbins, I almost got perturbed on behalf of Denver Broncos fans when I realized that I'm watching the Broncos this week. Like, wait, why are people not talking about J.K. Dobbins more? Because like this is everything that you'd always hope to see out of J.K. Dobbins. He's the 3rd leading rusher in the NFL, and I think it's very clear. 2 things. I don't want to make this sound like it's a backhanded compliment of Bo Nix or anything, but they've done a good job with that offense of recognizing and understanding that Bo Nix is still a young quarterback. But if you have a good rushing attack and you've got a really good defense, you don't have to ask your quarterback to do that much. And I know that, I know that you'd like Bo Nix to be more consistent, but the maturity he's shown and kind of doing a lot of the stuff that young quarterbacks don't want to do, which is being okay with some of the shorter stuff with the checkdowns and all of that.
Right.
Because they have the rushing attack, it's been a more balanced offense than the Texans, where the Texans, I mean, at times they've just been, early in the season especially, they were atrocious. And now what they've done is they've feasted on some of the lesser defenses, but then they got slapped upside the head by the Seahawks a couple weeks ago. And then the 49ers last week, the offense probably looked the best it has all year. The only question there is, all right, the best pass rushers for the 49ers were out. You got Fred Warner is out, and we just don't know how good that defense actually is. So the reason that the Broncos are a really good measuring stick for the Texans is that basically the Texans offense has looked good when they're facing a defense that doesn't have a good pass rush. And then I'm sitting there and I'm staring at Nik Bonitto going up against the rookie Ariante Ursary, the left tackle. And that's, I mean, whether the Broncos are able to blitz as much as they usually do or not because of the Pat Surtain injury, it's really, in my mind, one of the biggest things on the day is going to be how many times is Nik Bonitto one-on-one on Ariante Ursary.
Yeah, you look at Nik Bonitto and Jonathan Cooper, combined 14 sacks between the two of them, leading in terms of a pass rushing duo by sack production, going up against Ariante Ursary and Titus Howard there. When you look at the run game, which you mentioned that for the Broncos, it's certainly more successful this year than it was last year. It's been a tale of 2 seasons in that regard. Last year, so many in Broncos country, media and fans alike, were pulling their hair out when you had this trio of sadness with Javonte Williams, who's now figured out how to run the ball again with the Dallas Cowboys, and then a rookie in Audric Estime and a young player in Jaleel McLaughlin. Now, essentially, for a handful of game days, that entire backfield has been remodeled. They bring in J.K. Dobbins in June, and we sit at the halfway point of the NFL season, and he's the third leading rusher in the NFL behind James Cook and Jonathan Taylor. And when you're looking at the Broncos with your eyeballs, I think there are times where you go, man, they just don't seem to be running the ball consistently effectively from a commitment standpoint. Sean Payton's had to run the ball on his Waffle House play sheet multiple times over a couple of years. But when you look at the numbers statistically, Seth, it kind of points to a story that you're like, maybe they're not as bad as we thought. There you see it on the screen there, third best rushing attack as a team in the NFL. They're closer to that average median line in the pass game, but still a top 10 offense in points, and stacking that up against the clear strength, in my opinion, of this Texans team, which is basically the best all-around defense in the NFL, rushing, passing, and in a points per game metric. So I think that it was clear here in Denver going to be able to keep pace and maintain some consistency offensively, which has been their Jekyll and Hyde kind of attribute. J.K. Dobbins being healthy and available throughout the entirety of the season, which he has been, I'll knock on some marble over here thus far, along with a continued, maybe slower than expected upbringing for R.J. Harvey, is going to be key. So when you are looking at this Broncos offense, given what you know so in depth about the Texans defense, is that, in terms of stopping J.K. Dobbins, priority one from a defensive standpoint, or is it more about limiting Bo Nix, who has shown the ability to make plays with his legs? He likes to get outside the pocket and has some vertical passing threat to prepare against.
Yeah, I think, and you know, D'Amico just flat out said it. The first question D'Amico Ryans had about the Broncos offense was, and I think he might have been asked specifically about Bo Nix. He said the first thing about the Broncos offense is the rushing attack and how effective they can be, and that we need to be sure we stop that. And then he went on to talk about Bo Nix and his ability to create and his ability to scramble and all of those things. There are a lot of if you look at one of the Texans' scarier performance defensively this year, it was against, in a bad way, it was against the Bucs, and it was with Baker Mayfield. You know, the Bucs, the Texans basically had the game won in the fourth quarter. All they had to do was stop the Bucs' last drive. The Bucs were on at 4th and 10, and the Texans blitzed. The linebacker that blitzed missed Baker Mayfield in the backfield, and he ended up scrambling for a first down. Then a few plays later, they scored. And in that game, the Bucs ran the ball almost at will versus the Texans. And you know, the Texans are the number 5 rushing defense right now, but they're not as tough up the middle consistently. So some of these runs where I'm watching J.K. Dobbins, like, he almost has that little bit like that. He's not as slow to get out of the backfield as Le'Veon Bell, but he's got that vision,
a little stutter step. Yeah.
So if the O-line has the defensive tackles blocked well and set up well, there's some chances for those guys to just run right up the gut the way the Bucs did versus the Texans. So I think that is genuinely what D'Amico's probably most concerned about. The pass rush, the Texans pass rush is interesting because they've been rushing the passer really well, but they're only like 17th in sacks. And I think part of that is that they do a good job of having a disciplined pass rush and trying to keep guys in the pocket. And you don't see a whole lot of quarterback scrambles against them. And they do a good job of forcing bad throws, which yields interceptions, or they get into 3rd and long and they're able to, you know, just at least force an incompletion and get off the field. So the scrambling ability of Bo Nix is real, and it's impressive at times, but I think I'm still more concerned about, I don't want to see the Texans do a redo of that Bucs game where really the Bucs it just felt like they took whatever they wanted in the run game for most of the day.
Flipping to the opposite side of the ball here for each team, I find an interesting parallel looking from afar with what Bo Nix has gone through as he's now halfway through his sophomore season, and kind of how the evaluation and the trajectory of a guy like CJ Stroud has kind of experienced. CJ Stroud not being the first overall quarterback taken in that draft. He was taken number 2, and he kind of shot out of a cannon a little bit in his rookie season. The Texans made the postseason. And then during his second season, although they were a playoff team again last season, I feel like there was a significant national narrative that CJ Stroud was going through a sophomore slump. His touchdown to interception ratio, while still respectable, maybe tightened a little bit, and his yardage might have gone down because of offensive stylistic changes, I suppose. And it feels like that's kind of how we've started the first half of the sophomore season for Bo Nix. The offense looked a little bit more sputtery and clunky and disjointed than we thought. And it's just so easy to slap that label on a quarterback, especially a young one in their second year with that sophomore slump kind of assignment. But it does feel like, at least here locally in Denver, there are points of evidence to look at to say that Bo Nix is taking further progressions under a guy like Sean Payton, whose offensive scheme is notoriously hard to kind of digest, and you're drinking through a fire hose, especially there at the beginning. How did you guys there locally look at CJ Stroud's progression from year one to year two? And do you see kind of a similar or footing or situation that's gone on here with Bo Nix in Denver?
Yeah, I think it's similar. I was talking to Moose Johnston yesterday, and Moose Johnston talked about, they'd broadcast Bo Nix they'd seen every rookie quarterback last year basically, and that last year was around this time when Bo Nix things kind of clicked for him and took off, and then this year it looks like the same thing. I think with CJ, it's really interesting that everything you say about Sean Payton's offense is true. Like, I'm watching them this week, I'm like, oh, I have no idea how to classify them. Like, what type of an offense are they? They do everything. They just do everything. And as a young quarterback, that's really hard. With CJ, it's almost the opposite in that the scheme that they were trying to run with Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator, people in Denver are very familiar with. We call it Kubiak Shanahan here. You guys just call it a Shanahan scheme. But because of our the Kubiak Shanahan outside zone based scheme, I call it Kubshanistan. It's like most of what people in Denver have seen is the really good version of that. The problem with that scheme, when you're trying to base things on outside zone, if you don't run the ball well, and if you don't, it creates a lot of tackles for a loss. It creates a lot of penetration in the backfield if you're not good at it. And if you're not successful with the run, or at least like credible running the ball, it doesn't do anything to set up the play action. And we really saw as teams started to realize that, okay, well, these guys just can't run the ball. They don't know what they're doing. The offensive linemen are getting manhandled. I wasn't a huge fan of the offensive line coach. So when you're trying to run that scheme and you're not doing some of the fundamentals and the staples of that scheme well, it really starts to make it tougher for the quarterback. And, CJ's running a lot of play action, but the protection's not holding up, or people aren't biting on the run element of the play action. And it just got really hard to operate. So this year, I think a couple things happened. One, they incorporated a lot of the Josh McDaniels philosophies and kind of just the style of what they're doing in pass protection and everything, put a lot of pressure on the quarterback to direct things at the line of scrimmage. I think it took a while for CJ to start to really get that. It took a while for the young receivers to get a feel for exactly what they're supposed to be doing. But we've kind of seen growth in fits and starts at CJ being really comfortable getting rid of the ball quickly when he needs to, taking the easy money, like all the old cliches, don't go broke taking a profit.
Right.
He'd been raised up at Ohio State. He could sit back behind the line of scrimmage and wait for any one of like 5 or 6 future first-round draft picks to come open downfield. And it was kind of like a psychology or an appetite for the deep shot in the aggressive play. And I think he's kind of had that beat out of him to the point where now it feels like he's comfortable checking the ball down. And he knows that sometimes those checkdowns turn into explosive plays. Like last week, Woody Marks had a little check down that ended up being a 50-yard reception. And it's just a matter of, all right, now he's got to do that against the better defenses like a Seahawks or like a Denver Broncos.
Yeah, you mentioned Woody Marks, and he popped up on the injury report late, did he not? What's going on with him and the potential for maybe the Nick Chubb-Woody Marks duo to be a little light-handed or under the radar there?
Yeah, it's one of the frustrating things this year has been that in the short term, Woody Marks had a calf. He was limited in practice on Thursday. I haven't looked yet today, so we'll find out more about that. Nick Chubb, when he showed up at camp, it was clear that he's not the same peak version of Nick Chubb.
Right.
But when he does have good blocking in front of him, he can churn out yardage. He can just compared to last year, where Joe Mixon might have 150 yards in a game, but you'd feel like, but they didn't run the ball well. It was
Yeah.
Joe Mixon getting stuffed in the backfield and then reeling off a 75-yard run
Right.
here and a 30-yard run there. It wasn't consistent.
Feast or famine.
Yeah, exactly. This year it's been more consistent with Nick Chubb in the games where they've done it well, but like Joe Mixon being gone, and by the way, we have no clue what's going on with Joe Mixon. We had our first sighting of Joe Mixon at the facility in weeks, just in last week's game. That's where there's been a lot of us sitting around going like, so J.K. Dobbins signed in June, huh? Like they signed Nick Chubb around that same time for about the same money,
right?
And boy, that's I don't know if J.K. Dobbins would have wanted to come here because at the time I don't think they expected Joe Mixon to be lingering this long with this injury. So I'm guessing J.K. Dobbins wanted a chance to do what he's doing right now. But it's so it's a credible rushing attack right now. They're not getting tackled for a loss all the time. Like they're keeping the ball moving forward, but it's not what they want it to be.
I think I liked what you said about CJ Stroud and maybe the psychological or the mental shift between a quarterback that could just air it out at will in college and did so at the highest level, and then coming to the NFL and kind of adjusting to the fact that you're not playing at Ohio State anymore, and every player you're playing against was the best player on their college team in some respect. And I think that the evidence points to exactly what you said, because without a Nico Collins or a Christian Kirk, Stroud has a career high in completions last week with 30 and a season high 318 yards. So clearly without a couple of playmakers who I think are both going to be back this week, right? Nico Collins out of concussion protocol and then Kirk with the hamstring. So it's got to feel good that Stroud and the offense have shown the ability to be prolific and explosive in the pass game without some of their usual and higher paid, contributors from a skill position standpoint. Where is your guys' mindset at offensively with those reinforcements coming back in the receiver room? Still a little bit of uncertainty in the running back room, it sounds like, and coupled with the absence of the reigning defensive player of the year in Patrick Surtain in the Broncos secondary.
That's where, and I wanted to ask you this. Sorry to turn it into me interviewing you.
I love it. I love it.
Well, so I'm looking at how much, how aggressive the Broncos defense is. And Vance Joseph was back in the day. And how much man defense they typically play, but a lot of that's with Pat Surtain. But so last year when Riley Moss went out, I know that Jameis Winston threw for like 497 yards.
Yes.
And then
Jerry Jeudy had the biggest revenge game for a wide receiver in NFL history. Yep.
Yeah. So, and I know for that 3-game chunk, you think, okay, Riley Moss is no Pat Surtain, but it seemed to affect the defense. Yes. And is that the fear there right now that, okay,
yes.
It hurt that much with Riley Moss, what's it going to look like with Pat Surtain out?
Yeah, I think the way that Vance Joseph's scheme is dialed up with the ability that he has to get after the passer, but then also have a secondary that can allow hold up in coverage to give his interior defensive line, which is loaded with talent, and the bookends with Jonathan Cooper and Nik Bonitto, time to kind of operate and do their thing. It feels like, from my perspective, the Broncos defense is just this impenetrable dam, and it blocks all the water, right? But when you get a crack in that dam and water does start to trickle through, eventually the pressure kind of finds that point, water finds its level, and it can blow open. And that's kind of what we saw, I think, in 2024 with Riley Moss, White Boy Rick, going down. That's literally what his teammates call him, White Boy Rick. We call him the White Shadow. He's kind of this perfect anomaly. And I think he gets picked on more so than a lot of cornerback twos in the NFL would like because of who he plays opposite. But you had that stretch where defenses found a crack in the armor, right? And it kind of opened up a hole that was bigger than anticipated. And then Riley Moss rushes to come back against the Bengals with Joe Burrow and T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and Yoshi Voss and all those weapons that they have in the passing game in Cincinnati. And it still just kind of it snowballed a little bit further, and it wasn't like he was back at 100%. And so obviously you switch that to the opposite side with PS2 and the talent disparity, no disrespect to Riley Moss, between he and Patrick Surtain. It adds a whole other layer to that, because Riley Moss was getting those targets because Patrick Surtain takes away half the field, as a top-tier elite level corner can do. Now it really levels the playing field, and I think it's going to allow the Texans first and foremost, and opposing offenses in the near future, to be able to open up their playbook a little bit more and not have to be as worried about that. And we've been debating here locally whether or not the Broncos should do what they did in the second half against the Cowboys, which is just swap out Patrick Surtain for Chris Abrams-Draine, who's been on the team for a handful of years and seems to have, some favor in the eyes of Vance Joseph. Or is it time to move their first-round draft pick, Jahdae Barron, who's been playing kind of in that Jaquan McMillan inside nickel slot corner role, but he has inside-outside flexibility? Is this the natural progression of time to say, hey, we drafted this guy in the first round? They picked him over the likes of an Omarion Hampton when they clearly needed a running back. There was this whole thing about George and Sean Payton saying, we're not going to step over, a crystal because we need a blender, right? We need a blender in Omar, and it's like this whole drawn out analogy, but they love this guy. They're like, he's a top 10 talent. We got him at 20, blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't seem like, at least in this weekend against Houston, so maybe this is the litmus test game for Vance Joseph and that staff to say, hey, can Chris Abrams-Draine hold up, or are we going to have to, shuffle more pieces in our secondary around?
Yeah, and I wonder, it'll be an interesting test against this offense, especially because I don't think it's as bad a matchup for the Broncos versus this offense compared to, obviously some other offenses that have been more consistently good. But just because of that pass rush, that pass protection dynamic is that, like, the rookie left tackle, I'm high on him long term, but I'm really concerned about if he's one-on-one versus Nik Bonitto a whole bunch. So the last week, the Texans used 6 offensive linemen on about a third of their offensive snaps. They had Blake Fisher, the offensive tackle, play tight end a good amount. And they gave Ariante Ursary some help. But there's still going to be times where those guys are one-on-one or they have their one-on-one matchups. Really, the Texans right guard and right tackle feel fine about. It's really center, left guard, left tackle. And depending on how aggressive Vance Joseph wants to be, because it's not a lot of these blitz stats, sometimes it creates an image of because the Broncos quote unquote blitz so much. I mean, a lot of those ones that are classified as blitzes are just the classic 5-man front rushing. Right. They're not coming from all over the place or anything. Right. They're just winning their one-on-ones. And I think if they're doing that, even if they can't necessarily get as elegant with their blitzes as they'd like to typically, just getting those one-on-ones, they're going to have some opportunities. And I think the Texans' counterpunch to that in the passing game at least might be CJ just spreading it out, going empty. We've seen him do that a little bit more. And with Christian Kirk back, but then also Braxton Berrios got healthy, and then Jalen Noel, the rookie, really starting to come along. He does have speedy options underneath in the quick game. CJ's getting rid of the ball like a full quarter second faster on average than he did last year. So that part of his game has really developed and come along. It's still in the refinement mode though.
We've seen that a lot here with Sean Payton and Bo Nix as a pairing, especially in this most recent season, the first half of it, I should say, which is there's a lot of the quick game, the screen game, bubble screens, backfield passes, things of that nature. Given the prowess of a Nik Bonitto and a Jonathan Cooper and the way that they can get after you, the Broncos defense can from the interior with Zach Allen and Malcolm Roach and JFM and just kind of that murderer's row along the front. Do you anticipate that to be a consistent game plan for CJ Stroud to maybe utilize more quick game, running back screens, wide receiver screens, things of that nature? And is that atypical from how the Texans have operated so far?
I think the thing that we've seen the development with is CJ's willingness to use the checkdowns quickly. The screen game has been very hit or miss. Like Woody Marks had that nice long reception, but then I think he had 50 yards receiving on that one play, and I think he ended up with like 54 yards receiving in the game on several receptions because it was some screens or throws out in the flat that were just snuffed out immediately. I think that it's not as much about the play calling as CJ's willingness to use it. And that's been the big development, is him understanding, all right, if the first read is open, I'm taking it no matter what. I'm not waiting on it. Because he doesn't have an issue going through his progressions. He's got an appetite for the deep ball at times, a little too much. But then also in just hitting the check down, doing it in rhythm, just kind of realizing like, okay, nope. I mean, I'm taking the check down. That he's gotten better at that. So and the wide receivers have gotten smarter about it. And then it becomes a whole tackling and space dynamic, and everything that goes along with that. But this is going to be a really good. I'm not super optimistic that the Texans offense is going to do a whole lot versus that defense. Really, I think in this game, it's the Texans pass rush and the Texans defense at NRG Stadium has really turned most quarterbacks into the worst version of themselves. Really, everybody last year except Lamar Jackson really had a rough go of it in that stadium. And Will Levis for some reason, but the other
the mayonnaise.
Well, yeah, Will Levis got sacked 7 times in the first half, but the Texans let up so many big plays defensively. Like just they had some botched coverages and bad tackling in the second half. But Lamar Jackson's the only guy last year that had a really good game at NRG Stadium. So that's I think that's what the odds makers have looked at, along with Pat Surtain being out. And I've never. It's hard to find a game where the line moves 3 points based on a non-quarterback being injured, but it looks like that's what happened there.
All right, well, as we close up here, Seth, why don't we just put the cards on the table? What is your overall vibe and prediction for how this game ends out at 11 a.m. Mountain Time on Sunday?
I was going to say 21-17 Texans, but I'm not sure about the Texans scoring 3 touchdowns. So I'll probably go, let's do a weird 19-17.
19-17 Texans. Yeah, you know what? I got to be honest with you. The initial line was about 1.5 there, and I think that's probably pretty apt. I think the both defenses being pretty excellent by most metrics makes sense to me. And I just have not, even though the last 5 quarters there's got to be some almost NFL record when you're talking about a 5-quarter span to score 77 points as an offense. I still just feel like I don't want to lean too heavily into what we've seen, especially against the Cowboys, because that defense is just putrid. And I think that's been a big message from Sean Payton to his staff and his players of like, hey, let's not get delusions of grandeur here about what we were able to do. I think we saw here in Denver what the Broncos offense can be, like if it's operating in a vacuum and when things work perfectly, like, oh, that's what Sean Payton's system is supposed to look like when it's firing on all cylinders. And it's great.
Yeah.
But I think that the Broncos, when they have faced tougher tests, whether it's an elite level offense or an elite level defense that has an offense that can keep up. You know, I think of like the Colts and the Chargers early in the season. They get walked off in back-to-back weeks due to the Broncos to start the season, weeks 2 and 3. I'm still just not 100% convinced and bought in. I actually would have probably picked a similar score, something in the vein of 20-17 Texans in that regard. Obviously, I hope I'm wrong, and I'm sure my mentions will be flooded with Broncos fans who are upset with that prediction. But I think I agree with the sentiment that we both kind of shared at the start of the show. I think for both squads, this is a litmus test, measuring stick game about not just what's on the table at the end of the 2025 season, but how the forecast of the next 7 or 8 weeks will go.
Yeah. Yeah, and the one other thing that I should have brought up when I was talking about the touchdowns, the Broncos have a great red zone defense. The Texans offense in the red zone atrocious. So
yeah, that's true.
It's going to be a good battle. I'll be really surprised if there's just an outpouring of points by either of these teams.
Yeah, I think that's the one holdover from Denver from like the Vic Fangio era defensively. They were always bend but don't break. You know, you might be able to get them between the 20s, but once the field shortens up and they can spread that talent across a smaller surface area, it tends to bode well for him. So it sounds like it could be a little bit of bend, but don't break. And it just matters when on the field that break might happen. Seth, thank you so much for joining us. Shout out to you and our buddy Sean Pendergast, who we have as a guest on our station all the time. Love what you guys doing over there at Sports Radio 610 in Houston. Say hi to Parker Hillis for me. And we'll hopefully have plenty to react to in both of our respective stations coming up on Monday.
All right. Thanks, man. Anytime.
Appreciate it. To the rest of you out there, have a wonderful rest of your Halloween Football Friday afternoon, and we will catch you on Monday, a Reaction Monday, for the next rundown.
I do what I love what I do. Second nature to put in the work.